Hi everyone. I chose my topic to be the history of Nintendo and its popularity. I chose this topic because I found myself curious about the company and the man that started everything. Um, and it was one of the topics that I fell down a rabbit hole about and couldn't get out of, you know, without sharing it with an audience. Most of my information came directly from the Nintendo website, but a couple of other things also needed to be researched um, outside of it. That being said, let's get started. So, Nintendo, a name popular with video gaming, has a rich history that dates back to 1889. Um, Founded by Fusajiro Yamauchi in Kyoto, Japan, Nintendo originally produced handmade Hanafuda playing cards. Um, Over the decades, the company originally produced sorry. Over the decades, the company ventured into various businesses, including taxi companies and a love hotel, even making ramen noodles before finding its hand in the gaming industry. And this information comes from a couple whose first names are Nicholas and Saki that wrote a blog about the history of Nintendo. Nintendo went through a lot of trial and error before they began to get extremely popular. However, this speech is about the history of Nintendo and its rise to popularity and stardom. In the 1970s, inspired by the success of companies like Atari, Nintendo entered the video game market. Their first console, the Color TV game, above, was released in 1977. However, the launch of the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES, in 1985 was what revolutionized the gaming industry, and that would be this one right here. They began selling their Famicom system in Japan, which was short for Family Computer. This actually became what we know now as the NES, or Nintendo Entertainment System. Throughout the rest of the 1980s, Nintendo continued to expand upon Famicom and the NES. They went so far as to develop a hands-free controller for the NES, which made it more accessible to fans. Their gaming library grew to 65 titles, which assisted in appealing to adults. Fun fact, speaking of games and age groups, many popular titles were developed at this time, ranging from The Legend of Zelda to Super Mario Bros. This one's The Legend of Zelda, this one's Super Mario Bros. These titles, especially Super Mario Bros., were popular amongst children and were well known by kids just as Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny. And this comes from the blog that was written by Nicholas and Saki, which is titled The History of Nintendo. So, Nintendo continued to innovate with the release of the Game Boy in 1989, the first successful handheld gaming device. The 1990s saw the launch of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Nintendo 64, both of which were hugely popular. We're going to start discussing the Game Boy, which is all their various Game Boy models. The Game Boy had advanced computer modeling graphics introduced with another new Donkey Kong game, as well as, quote, systems with colored casings, which came directly from the Nintendo website. Game Boy accessories released in 1994, along with the vast number of games that could be played. Donkey Kong Country was released this year with these Game Boy accessories. Further Game Boy development lasted well into the early 2000s, where Nintendo sold over 100 million copies worldwide. From the Game Boy, we saw the introduction of the Game Boy Advance alongside many titles. A quote directly from the Nintendo website: "It set the mark as the fastest selling console ever, with 500,000 units being sold within the first week in Europe." End quote. We saw the rise of GameCube as well in the late 2001, and even an e-reader hardware for Game Boy Advance. By the end of 2002, more than 25 million Game Boy Advance units were in homes around the world. These quotes were taken from the Nintendo website. In 2003, they added a clamshell design to the Game Boy Advance, and GameCube saw some successful titles. They dropped a Game Boy player for GameCube, and this actually meant that gamers could experience Game Boy and the advanced Game Boy titles on their television sets, which, meanwhile, the ever-popular NES was released in Europe as the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. To show how popular Nintendo became at this time, quote, "The console went on to sell more than 46 million units worldwide." With this console, a popular title, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, was released. Next, we have the Nintendo 64. 1996 saw the introduction of the Nintendo 64 in Japan. Nintendo 64 was the world's first in-home video game system. According to Nintendo's site, quote, "More than 500,000 systems were sold on the first day." So the following year, it turns out Nintendo 64 sold 2.3 million copies. They also introduced vibrations in their games in the Nintendo 64 console. Their N64 library continued to expand well into the thousands. Speaking of the thousands, Nintendo introduced the Wii, a console that brought motion sensing technology to the masses and appealed to a broader audience. More recently, the Nintendo Switch, which was released in 2017, and the Switch OLED, which was released in 2021, have both been a massive success, combining the portability of a handheld device with the power of a home console. However, we're discussing the Wii first. It was introduced around the end of 2006. The console's success is bolstered by titles such as Wii Sports Resorts, and the newest episode in the Zelda series, Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. The Wii evolved into a system that promoted movement through the usage of motion sensing technology. So, a good example of motion sensing using motion sensing technology would be a game such as Michael Jackson The Experience or Just Dance, where you use the controllers and you dance to the music, and the motion sensors pick up on the movement of the controller to match the rhythm in the game. This also, Mario Kart Wii was also one of those games that did use motion sensing. With the introduction of this technology, Wii Fit and Wii Balance came into the equation. The Switch is a much later, more recent development. Speaking from personal experience, this console is all-in-one. It's handheld, portable, and can be taken just about anywhere. It's versatile, allowing for multiplayer and single-player games to be played on it with the detachable game controllers. The Switch and Switch OLED also have a dock, which you can hook up to your TV and see on the big screen. You can dock the Switch. You can dock the Switch screen in the dock and attach the Joy-Cons to play, similar to a Wii. So, y'all remember those old games, the old game consoles? Well, with the purchase of their online expansion pack, those older titles can be um, played. Like the games from the Nintendo 64 library, the Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy Classic games, all of those can be played on the Nintendo Switch. Yeah, which I think is really cool because then you can experience the classics. And from its humble beginnings as playing card company to become a global leader in the gaming industry, Nintendo's journey is a testament to innovation and resilience. Truly, Nintendo and its history are fascinating. They've created so many wonderful stories that I will always hold dear, and many more I'll continue to explore. I believe Fusajiro Yamachi would be proud